Awesome.
Okay. Do you want me to let everybody in?
Yeah, let's let everyone in.
We're ready.
Okay.
Okay, great. Corey, shall I let you take care of that?
I will, with the one that has the phone number. You can go ahead
Okay.
and get started.
Okay, awesome. Perfect. I'll go ahead and do roll call. Well, actually, no, I'll call this meeting to order. The meeting has begun, and now I'll do roll call. And how many meetings? And I still don't know the order of things. Okay, great. So I'm going to go by the order on my screen. So we have Judy Nog. Here. Jacques Julians.
Here.
Let's see, Juliet Boone. Great. Terry Palmos.
Yes, yes.
Great. Danny Theodorou. Yep, I see you. And Mason Moyer. Great. And then our ex officio, Sarah Silver, I see you. Hello, welcome back. Perfect. So everyone's here. Let's go to our agenda review. Are there any additional agenda items to be brought forth tonight? Okay, seeing none, I will actually bring forward an item. Last night was the boards and commissions presentations at council, and I have a follow-up item to discuss in response to that. There was some great back and forth between some council members and myself, and so I'd like to discuss our relationship with council and how we can, improve and strengthen that. There are some suggestions, and so I'd like to open it up to the board to discuss, how we want to move forward, and improving long-term relationships with the board. So I'd like to add that after 5B, which would be, 6B, after the discussion about the March housing insecurity listening session. I expect it'll be a quick, potentially quick discussion, so it won't take up a lot of time. So I'd like to bring forward a motion to add that item after 5B. Oh, sorry, you're all muted.
Yeah, still moved. I moved. So moved.
Okay, Judy seconded. All in favor of adding the item after 5B? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, great. Motion passes. Okay, Jay, or someone is sharing their screen. That's great. Okay, great. So we can move forward then to the public hearing. And I will hand it over. To Crystal or Jay. Yeah, you go ahead.
Yep. I'm just going to go over some of the rules. So hi, I'm Jay Sugnitz. I'm staff with the City of Boulder. So welcome to the Zoom meeting. This is sort of our first Zoom meeting the Housing Advisory Board has done with interpretation services. So there are a couple of things to keep in mind for this portion of the meeting. So please keep your mute, Jacques, when you're not speaking. Thank you. It's going to help a lot. A lot of these rules are just to help the interpreter to be able to provide this service. So also that you'll notice this interpretation button at the bottom. So you can select your preferred language by clicking on that globe. And a couple guidelines. So speak slowly and clearly pronounce your words and breathe between sentences. That's extremely important. It takes a lot of time or effort on the part of the interpreter. So just please take your time. Try not to interrupt each other. It makes it really difficult as well. If you have a headset with a microphone, please use it. Select one language channel and speak only in that channel's language. So you can ask questions, or the interpreter will interpret the Spanish speaker that's testifying. I think I got that right. And then finally, just try to avoid using idioms. They're difficult to interpret, things like cold turkey or being under the weather. So those are some of the guidelines for the interpretive piece. And then I just wanted to cover quickly the normal rules that we cover for public meetings. Hold on one second. So these are our usual rules. So we do try to strike a balance between meaningful, transparent engagement as well as online security. So this is an official city meeting. Any activity that does disrupt or otherwise delay are prohibited. There is a time for speaking and asking questions, but it's limited. No person shall speak except when recognized by the person presiding. In this case, it's Charlotte, the chair. And you can't speak for longer than the allotted time. Each person shall register to speak at the using your real name, and Corey's working. Any person believed to be using a pseudonym will not be permitted to speak. And no video will be permitted except of city officials, employees, and invited speakers. Everyone else will be asked to participate by voice only. The person presiding the meeting shall enforce these rules. So again, Charlotte, the chair. If the chat function is enabled, please only use that to communicate with either Corey or myself if you're having technical difficulties. And then, as we talked about, only the host and individuals designated by the host can share their screen during the meeting. So those are the quick rules. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Charlotte, to start the public hearing.
Perfect. Let's see, let me get back to my agenda here. Thanks for that, Jay. We'll speak very slowly. Is there a staff presentation before the public hearing? That's the order I'm seeing on the agenda. So, Crystal, that's right? Is that your understanding?
Yeah, I'm also seeing we've had two people come into the room
I will admit
believe
them.
Yeah, and I believe they're both I'm guessing they'll go into the Spanish language channel. So it may be worthwhile to just, I don't know if there's anything we need. I think we've oriented ourselves and they're pretty familiar with how to use the interpretation function. So I think we should all select the English channel at this point. Am I right, Marina? I'm not sure if Marina is, she might be actually still in the Spanish channel.
I think she is.
Yeah, so everybody who's staying in the English should select English. And if you're Spanish speaking, you should select Spanish.
So everyone at the bottom, you'll see the interpretation globe. So just choose English if that's the language you'd like to use.
And I'm not sure what that does for our, I think there are phone codes and I'm not sure what they are, if it's like *1 or 2. Marina, do you know? You don't know? Okay. Okay, so well, hopefully, I think everyone is familiar. I've seen in multiple public meetings like this before. So I think all the Spanish speakers are all set, and hopefully the English as well.
Perfect. So will you proceed with the presentation first?
Yes.
Perfect.
Marina, are you all set? Okay, great. Thank you.
Were we going to do the minutes? I'm sorry. Were we going to approve the minutes?
So the approval,
Later.
it's later, Judy.
Okay.
It's actually after regular public participation. So don't worry, I didn't forget it this time.
Okay.
It's good you checked.
All right, I'm trying to make sure I don't choose the wrong screen. Not that one. PowerPoint slideshow. Does this look like the slideshow? Oops, let me see here. Does that look
Yep.
correct? Okay, great.
Perfect.
So good evening, board members. I'm Crystal Launder, and I'm here tonight to talk about Ordinance 8432, the Manufactured Home Sales Ordinance. The last time I presented to this board was in July of 2019, when I, as staff, brought to the board the manufactured housing strategy. And so the item that you're seeing tonight is part of the implementation of that manufactured housing strategy that you heard a little over a year ago. Okay. So as noted in the memo, manufactured housing is the most affordable market rate housing option in Boulder. Market rate home ownership, excuse me. But there's a tension that exists between the rights of the homeowner and the manufactured home community owner exercising their role as a landlord. So as I go through this presentation, I'm going to start with going over the major state and local policy milestones that regulate this industry and regulate that landlord-tenant relationship in Boulder, including Ordinance 8383, which is part of the implementation of the manufactured housing strategy that has already passed back in September. And then I will also touch on the guiding principles of the strategy, the community engagement process, and then at that point I will dive into the proposed changes to Code Section 10.12.25 and 10.12.26. And you'll come to understand more of what I'm talking about with those code sections in just a minute or two here. So before I talk about this slide and the next slide, just please note that on most of the slides, I'm going to have the English on the left side in teal, and on the right side in kind of that slate gray color, it will be the Spanish. But for these two slides, I'm having the state policy in that slate gray and the local policy in that teal color. So manufactured housing regulation or policy really began in 1991 with the passage of the Colorado Mobile Home Park Act. And that act was updated about approximately a decade later. And then the city started doing more or actually its first real effort of regulating that landlord-tenant relationship in 2015 with Ordinance 8043. And that ordinance addressed ensuring that manufactured homeowners could sell their pre-1976 homes, and that any upgrades that were required by the community owner of the homeowner were not excessive. And then there was also a provision about the responsibility for tree maintenance being that of the community owner. In 2 years later, in 2017, Ordinance 8216 then was adopted, and that ordinance introduced a right to privacy for the homeowners. It also introduced a prohibition against retaliation. And the final piece that it introduced was mediation. So it kind of creates an opportunity for mediation between those two parties instead of always just kind of, litigating or taking actions against one another. Oop. Trying to see, did it advance? Okay, so did I skip a slide? Okay, I'll go back. Yeah, and then more recently, in 2019, at the state level, the Mobile Home Park Oversight Act, or Act Oversight Bill, introduced the Dispute Resolution and Enforcement Program. And that program was really the first time that there's some active regulation of this bill. Previously, you would have to go to court if there was a conflict that was covered by the act. And then moving back here locally, in 2019, the manufactured housing strategy was adopted. And 2 bills were passed last year at the state level, the Mobile Home Park Act updates. And so that's another update bill that's come along since the Mobile Home Park Act was established. And that had a lot of clarifying of the Mobile Home Park Act. And then also the Mobile Home Park Residents Opportunity to Purchase bill. So that was enacted. And what that does is when a community comes up for sale that residents live in, they now have an opportunity to participate in and have an opportunity to potentially purchase that community. And so the most recent piece of the most recent ordinance that's come forward out of the mobile home park, the manufactured housing strategy came forward to council on September 1st of last year. And we just kind of generally call that the manufactured housing ordinance because it was a bucket of action items that had come out of the strategy. Those items included enforcement improvements to Chapter 10-12. There were some challenges with pursuing enforcement, and so we did some kind of clarifying and just making it easier. We also, from this ordinance, there was a language access notification. So now a park community owner would notify a homeowner as they're moving in, or as they hand out new rules and regulations, or if there are notices that come out with a lease that they have, that there are resources that the city has that can help them with if they have needs around language. Then there are a number of new tenant notifications, including rent history increase, pet restrictions, fees for late payments, and dishonored checks, and deposit or use fees for facilities and amenities. And finally, there's a 60-day notification requirement if the lot dimensions are going to change. And there are 4 guiding principles of the manufactured housing strategy. Those are affordability, accountability, viability, and community. And the 2 that are being forwarded tonight with Ordinance 8432 are affordability. So it really kind of ensures that the retaining of the value of that home for the homeowner, or at least advances that opportunity. And then there is also, just the general idea of community being that we've identified that there are vulnerable community members living in these communities and just providing additional protections. So this is a chronology here of our engagement process. I have it starting on September 1st with that city council meeting when Ordinance 8383 was adopted, because that was really when we started hearing from homeowners, a large number of homeowners that they really weren't talking in their emails about the ordinance. When they were providing testimony or writing to the council, they were actually talking about the need for more regulation for mobile home sales. And then, so after that, actually the city council directed us to they adopted 8383, but directed staff to bring that back to them by the end of the year. And so we went through received some proposed amendments from a coalition of homeowners. And we had a stakeholder opportunity between October 26th and November 11th. And then it came to council on December 15th. there was an email, again, from a coalition of homeowners that there was additional changes that needed to happen. And so council suggested that it come to the Housing Advisory Board. And so we've had another round of input collected between December 22nd and January 5th. And we're here tonight, and then we have a couple of city council meetings coming up. So the first reading and the second reading, ideally. And so again, so what this mobile home sales ordinance does is it amends two existing code sections, or two that I've already talked about, 10-12-25, which is that limitation on the prohibition sale of mobile homes. That's the official title. And the 10-12-26, the limitation on required upgrades to existing mobile homes. And it introduces new restrictions, and those restrictions would include that community owners would not be able to interfere with, discourage, or delay home sales or purchases. They would not be able to interfere with listing or sale of a home by providing false information, unreasonable delays, steering potential buyers to other homes, or discouraging potential buyers. And then no interior inspection of the home could be required by the community owners. And then 10-12-26, some of the new restrictions include, the two new restrictions include requiring, they could not require unreasonable upgrades of accessory structures. So currently the code reads that you can't require unreasonable upgrades of the home, but this extends it so that it also addresses the accessory structures. So often there are like carports and sheds and porches. This last bullet, deny residency or hinder sale if buyer agrees to perform maintenance or repairs. So what that means is that currently it's the seller who performs any of the, as they go to sell their home, they're given, there's an inspection that occurs, and then they're asked to perform any, kind of necessary maintenance or repairs. This allows that the buyer to assume that responsibility. But if a buyer does assume that responsibility, they couldn't be denied residency, or there couldn't be like a, kind of impacts on that ability to sell. I think the new timelines are a big piece of what's happening with this. It's really kind of setting timelines and expectations. One of the risks for a homeowner is when they are trying to sell their home, if the timeline extends too much, it can create a lot of challenges with selling the home. So these timelines just kind of ensure that it kind of marches along, and there's an understanding by the community owner, and then also by the seller and the buyer of what the timing is. And then this is my catch-all slide. So there's also one of the challenges that I think has existed since we enacted 10-12-25 and 26 is that home buyers and home sellers are often unaware that they have both rights and responsibilities under these these code sections. And so this would give those sellers and buyers that notification. And it would also provide them with a link to the Mobile Home Park Resources webpage, which would have a user-friendly buyers and sellers guide. Another challenge certainly has been that people are often just trying to interpret the code, and it's hard to interpret the code. Codes are written for enforcement, not necessarily for regular reading. Some flexibility is introduced through this. There is a deadline on the previous slide. There's a deadline that when a potential buyer is approved or denied, that they should be notified within 10 days. 10 business days. But what the flexibility created is that if there is something that's beyond their reasonable control, like a pandemic, for example, that could be considered because the penalty, if they can't meet that 10-day deadline, is that there's an automatic approval of that buyer. And another piece of flexibility is that piece again that I spoke about. The buyer may complete the required repairs. So previously it was only the seller that was responsible for that. That was challenging for older homeowners that might be on a fixed income to perform all those repairs. So that's just creating flexibility so that the buyer could potentially perform those repairs instead. And there's just some new clarifying terms. The term improvement, there was some concern that wasn't, it sounds like it has, that it's just broader than that. So we've really changed that to the word work, And so with that, here is the next steps slide. So again, just a reminder that we'll be bringing this to City Council for first reading on February 2nd, and then 2 weeks later, it's scheduled for second reading. I probably should have put in a questions slide, but this is the motion language if that's the decision of the board to adopt this. And with that, I am done with my section.
Thanks, Crystal.
You're welcome.
I'm wondering if you want to stop sharing your screen so folks can ask questions, or you can keep this up as it's helpful potentially.
Sure. I'm just, let's see here.
That's okay.
I'm trying to figure out how to unshare here. I apologize.
Okay.
Something migrated in front of
That's okay.
my menu.
Well, while you're working through that, I'm just going to scroll through here and open it up to the board for questions to Crystal. If board members have questions, will you just physically raise your hand? I'm scrolling through here. Okay, great. I see that Danny's hand is up. So Danny, you want to go ahead and ask your question? And
Sure.
speak slowly, remember.
Okay.
Thanks.
I will. So just want to clarify the scope of the feedback that council's looking for from us, so that we're kind of pointed and directed in terms of what input or feedback is most important from council's perspective to get from us on this.
Yeah, so I think my read, and I think Jay is as good at answering this as I am, but my read from that meeting is, this is another opportunity for a public hearing because they wanted to have additional opportunities for that. So certainly some of it is, I think, hearing from the community, and then certainly, because this originated from community members, and it's been actually through quite a lot of vetting to get it here. Jay, what are your thoughts?
I think you answered it well. I mean, basically council is asking to vet the language to make sure we get it right before it goes back to them. So that's really your task.
Awesome. Jacques, I saw your hand as well. Do you have a question?
Yeah, just I kind of reading through it, there was just one thing that popped out to me. And as you said, maybe this has already been through a lot of vetting. But in 10, 12, 25, if I just said that right, C, the final piece that the park owner fails to deliver notice of the denial or approval within 10 business days shall be deemed approved. I totally get the concept for that. My only concern is, and maybe this is worked out later in the process, but my only concern is that you're creating a condition where potentially somebody could assume that is approved because the 10 days has passed, and then the property owner can come back with a event beyond their reasonable control, but there may have already been kind of legal entanglements real estate wise at that point. I'm not sure. So anyway, that was the only thing that I made any note of in there.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I will just run that concern by the attorney
Okay, great.
that I'm
Cool.
working with.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Terry. You're muted.
Unmute. Am I unmuted now? On that note, that kind of language is used a lot in contracts to avoid people from dragging their feet. But the unintended consequence there is if the mobile home park owner knows that that's out there, then kind of the knee-jerk reaction is just to deny it right away. So that way they're not automatically being approved after 10 days. So that's something else to think about. I mean, that language is in a lot of contracts. Again, because they don't want people to drag their feet and they want to get an answer and that kind of stuff. But it can make things very complicated. In general, reading some of this stuff, it seems like there's a lot of ping-ponging back and forth, like within 5 days this, and then if that happens, 3 days there, and then if it's just a lot of back and forth to keep track of. I understand the concept. We want to make it easier for people to buy and sell mobile homes, and that makes perfectly good sense to me. It's just sometimes, speaking from an attorney's perspective that reads a lot of legal contracts, these are written by lawyers a lot of times, and it's, well, within 5 days, this has to happen. And then if that doesn't happen within 3 days, that has to happen. And if that doesn't happen within 7 days, that has to happen. And I get it because you're trying to set time deadlines. It just can get really complicated in a situation where people, I don't know, pay that close of attention to 5 days here and 4 days there. It's just something to be aware of. I'm not suggesting changes. It just can get really complicated. And then you layer on, the business transaction, the real estate transaction of, typically loans and contracts and all that kind of stuff that happens on the other side. It can get complicated, is all I'm saying. I don't know if there's a way to make it easier. It sounds like these rules are attempting to do that. It sounds like they will do that if they're adopted, but it's a tough deal.
Yeah. I think, may I speak to that concern?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the user-friendly buyer and seller guide really could be useful to a community owner as well, because that will have it, kind of, we're going to try to boil it down and simplify it so it's easy to track from that perspective.
Good.
Mm-hmm.
Judy?
This is a question for either Crystal or Charlotte. Besides this part right here, after the public speaks, will we get another chance to discuss or ask questions, or is this it?
Yep, there will be discussion, board discussion, and then our decision following the public comment.
Thanks.
Great. Are there any other questions at this time before we move to the public hearing? Juliet?
I was just, can you guys hear me? Can you hear me? I was just curious. I mean, it seems straightforward and mutually beneficial, and it brings clarity to these situations. What have the objections been to something like this on either side? I'm just curious at wanting to understand if there even are any objections. Seems like it would be straightforward.
Yeah, I have it. I feel like I've tried to document, all of the input on both sides. One of the observations that I made is in the input that I received from the community owners often didn't line up necessarily. It wasn't. There weren't many points of tension between them. It was maybe a request for, that say from a community owner that there was that 60 additional, a 60-day limit on the buyer, that they had to have some kind of reasonable cutoff where they completed the repairs if they had assumed them. I think the one point maybe where there was any tension was around that 10 days. It's important it was expressed by homeowners as being important to have that shorter timeline for the buyer to know whether or not they had been approved. But there's concerns that just things can go wrong. And so the solution really was to have it be 10. It originally in the 2015 language was 10 days. We bumped it up to 10 business days. And then we also created that flexibility so that, if something just beyond the control of the community owner came up, that they could appeal.
So was that, Terry, was that what you were referencing there, just the timing piece?
Yeah, I'm not saying it's wrong or bad or change it. It's just, you just get in these ping pong battles in these agreements sometimes, 10 days for this, 5 days for that, 3 days for this. And for people who, got like, I don't know, it's fine. I'm not saying anything's wrong with it. Just, it's something to be aware of.
Great. Anything else before we move to the public hearing? Okay, and I'm sure that there will be more discussion afterwards. I'm eager to hear from our guests here. So I'd like to move to the public hearing. Jay, were you going to outline the rules for the public hearing, or shall I go ahead and do that? Oh, you're muted.
I covered them earlier.
Okay. Oh, right. Okay. So are you going to pull up a clock?
Yep, I have the clock. I can share the clock.
Okay, great. Each speaker will have 3 minutes. And so it looks like there are 8 people, actually 7, because I think Renee is using her phone for her voice. So I'm going to start in no particular order. I apologize if you entered the room before someone else. You're all on my screen, so I'm just going to go in order. You'll all be able to speak. So forgive me. I will start with, let's see. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, but Luz Galicia. And I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself here. Okay. And apologies if you're just here. If you're just here to listen, then we can move on.
Luz may be in the Spanish language channel.
Okay. Okay.
I'm not sure
Okay.
what the solution is to that.
Okay. Will there be translation from Spanish to English as well?
There should be, right?
Okay.
Why don't we keep going and come back if we can figure out what's going on with Luz?
We'll come back to you, Luz. We'll come back to you. So let's see. Next on my screen, I'm going to go to Renee. Renee, I know that you're using your phone, if I understand correctly, to speak. So I'm going to ask you to unmute your phone. Sorry, guys, figuring this out.
Hello?
Yes.
There we go.
I think that was Amy, so I'm going to mute Amy and then try to speak again.
Hello?
Hello.
This is Renee. Hi.
Hi. All right, go ahead. Go ahead. Thank you for coming.
Oh, thank you. So this is Renee Hummel. I'm president of the Vista Village Community Association. And I appreciate the Housing Advisory Board hearing this. I'm very grateful to City Council for all the work that they're doing on behalf of manufactured homeowners. I just want to stress the importance of this ordinance for the people who live in our community. There have been so many violations. I don't know how many of you were able to read the letter that I sent, I think it was yesterday. But these problems just kind of avalanched last year. Like 5 different people I talked to were traumatized by their selling experience. And there were actually more people I talked to who didn't feel traumatized, but who had certain problems that are addressed by this ordinance. And I do want to emphasize what Crystal said about, in response to the question regarding that 10 business days to approve a buyer. As she pointed out, the 10 days language has been in the law since 2015 for almost 6 years now, and I haven't heard of any problems with it. So it was actually in the park owner's interest to change it to 10 business days, which is actually a little bit longer. The timelines are also quite important. Another thing that I sent late this afternoon, which you probably didn't get to see, is one of our homeowners who moved told the park that they were selling in July, and they didn't get around to doing the inspection until September. And that's just way too long to wait. And with our mobile homes, you know, we're paying lot rent every single month. And it's not like a mortgaged home where, you know, well, you pay the mortgage and you're actually building equity with each mortgage payment. This is just expense, expense, expense. So the longer things delay, the harder it is. And there are instances where at the very last minute on the day of closing, they add new requirements that the seller is supposed to take care of. So it's just been very, very difficult for people here. And I really feel like the ordinance provides clear and reasonable guidelines for everyone to follow, and that it will be very helpful for us all moving forward. So I very much appreciate your consideration of this, and I think that's all I have to say. So thank you.
This is Crystal. I apologize for stepping in, but Renee was speaking fairly quickly. If people can speak a little bit more slowly. I know she had a lot to say. Thank you.
For sure. Apologies that I didn't emphasize that before she started. Thank you, Renee. I'm going to mute you. Oh, good. Okay, you muted yourself. Okay. Let's see. So I see Amy's hand raised, and I want to make sure that everyone who wants to speak gets to speak. So if you want to speak, please raise your hand. You can click on react. I believe it's, nope. How do you raise your hand? Let's see. You can.
Reactions.
Is it reactions? I don't see it. I only see the clap and then the thumbs up in reactions. So if you want to speak, sorry. Oh, so you go to participants, I believe. No.
Huh. That
And
doesn't
then
seem to be on here.
Okay. Well, in the chat, if you can't find the raise hand in the chat, oh good, Tanya found it. That's great. I can't. If you can find the raise hand, raise your hand. If not, send me a chat indicating that you'd like to speak in one way or another, and I'll call on you. Thanks for everyone's patience with this. This is the first time I'm doing a public hearing here. So, okay, I will go to Amy next, since I saw that hand go up and I see Amy unmuted. So you can go ahead and start whenever you're ready. Thanks.
Hello, good evening. My name is Amy Bove, and I'm an attorney that specializes in representing manufactured home parks. I'm here specifically representing Boulder Meadows today. I'd first like to thank the city of Boulder, specifically Crystal. They are, out of all the municipalities I work with, one of the most receptive and responsive in terms of feedback from the communities and really anybody in this process. That being said, one of the things I would like to identify when we're looking at these additional regulations is to go back to what we just heard Crystal explain to in length. And that is the amount of regulations that have been brought up and imposed on the mobile home industry in the last 2 to 3 years. Now, I'm not going to debate whether it was necessary or not. I think that most of those changes are good, but we've had so many now, they are becoming duplicative. Specifically, we now have a statewide program that is funded by each unit that is privately owned or a lease option on a mobile home lot that they pay $24 per year on to create this DOLA program where tenants free of charge and also landlords can bring their grievances, and there's some expertise on what the rules are and how they are to be followed. That is something that has just been enacted about a year now, a little less than a year. And we need time to, see how that works. But now let's specifically talk about this folder ordinance. One of the examples of duplication on the ordinance, and it does go to this idea of timelines, is your 10/12/25C. Okay, that's on your page 10 to 11. That's where it does state that 10 days for denial and a 10 days also to explain the denial. Well, already the Colorado Rental Application Fairness Act addresses this. They just don't do it consecutively, giving that landlord more time, because think about it, you got 10 days to get all the paperwork done, but then they're saying in that same 10 days, you need to get that park manager to write down exactly why you're denied, where the Rental Fairness Act gives you 20 days. So 10 days to deny, another 10 days to explain why. Another issue that we have with this ordinance is the 6-month limitation in the paragraph. It's regarding repairing the home. They give you up to 6 months for the landlord to give that deadline. We have never seen a home take that long, nor have this ever become a problem. It's just another unnecessary regulation that those times have to be kept track on. So once again, in general, there's a lot of good to be done that has already been done. To add these additional regulations are just going to end up hindering and often confusing the tenant and certainly bogging down the landlord. So thank you guys very much. And thank you, the City of Boulder, again, for always listening.
Thank you. All right. I see Tanya's hand raised, and so I'm going to go over to Tanya. Tanya, I'll ask you to unmute you.
Hello.
Hello. Go ahead.
This is Tanya Petty. I'm at Vista Village here in Boulder as well, and I completely disagree with Amy. I think these regulations are much needed. I believe that the protections for the homeowners themselves who are actually paying for the investment is completely one-sided to the management and community owners. I tried to sell my home a few years back, and I was given a list that would have cost me thousands and thousands of dollars. And so I was discouraged from selling. When asked for them to do an inspection, it never happened. Many of my buyers were discouraged because of my advocacy for homeowners' rights and participation in the HOA and starting it here. I've been an advocate for years, coming to the city council with issues relating to homeowner problems. A neighbor had to spend $7,000 to $8,000 to sell their home in order to get out of here and move. There's several people that cannot afford to do that. I myself cannot afford to do that. And I would like to sell my home at some point. And it's been very difficult to get any type of cooperation at all. And in regards to the duplicity in the state, new laws in the state enforcement, they're not even set up hardly yet. I've been participating in a lot of their Zoom calls and stuff. And they've had 90 some complaints, but very few have been settled. And they're just hiring people to do the investigations, the initial what are they called? When you talk to the people, conversations, the initial conversations to start those investigations. So to rely on that as a deterrent is not appropriate at this time as well. I would like to thank as well the city council and the mobile home strategy people that have been involved in the engagement with the communities as well as the homeowners, community owners. And I appreciate their ability to clarify not only the problem, but the solutions to those problems. And I would like to appreciate the council as well for giving us this time to voice our opinions in this matter in a way that the community can be heard. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tanya. All right. So I want to see if there are any other speakers, Luz or Carlos. Oh, perfect. You found where to raise your hand, Luz. I'm going to unmute you. Oh, I think you can speak now.
Okay, thank you so much. I had to switch to myself onto the computer. Hi, my name is Luz Galicia. I've been working in City of Boulder for a couple years, and my role is to engage the underrepresented communities, bring their voices, and I think this is my time to just reinforce and to probably educate a little bit more that selling a house for a mobile home owner is not like a regular house. We have to understand that the people, or the residents, people who lives in mobile home, most of them, they're residents in low-income community. And when they try to sell their houses, they're selling everything. They're selling their savings, they're selling their history, and the least that they can get is some transparency in the process and collaboration from the landlords to make this process simple, because it's very difficult for them to just let go without the transparency that everything is gonna come right. In my experience working with the community, there are community that has been requesting for long not be targeted like they've been targeted for so many years, and it's only on the last couple years that mobile homes they've been having a lot of protections, and the communities they getting educated on that. So transparency in this process from the landlords to the residents and future residents, and respect the rights that they have, it will make a difference. And I will encourage the other guys that are here, Carlos and Sonia and Magali, that maybe they can speak. But once again, mobile homes communities, they've been not well knowing for respecting the rights. Now they have this opportunity and they ask for trust, transparency, and to let them be understanding and mindful that the mobile homes is everything for them, their houses, their home, their past, their present, and their future. And that's what I had to say. So I will ask support what Crystal just presented. And thank you so much for representation in English and Spanish. Makes a lot of difference. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. So would anyone else like to speak? Would love to hear from you if you're here. Okay. If you're unable to find the hand raise, please send a note. Okay. Corey, do you see anything indicating that anyone else would like to speak?
No, nothing on my end, and it is in the participants. You can hover over your name, the blue button that says more, and that should give the
Sí,
participants
Marina.
the icon.
Oh, perfect.
Yo solo quiero agradecer a todo el staff del municipio por esta oportunidad y a Crystal por su trabajo dentro de las casas móviles. Yo creo que todo lo que se está haciendo es en beneficio a nosotros los propietarios de casas móviles, ¿verdad? Y yo creo que estamos de acuerdo en todas las regulaciones que se están realizando. Sí, gracias por esta oportunidad y gracias a todos ustedes.
Thank you. That worked very well. I'm really appreciative of this translation service tonight. Thank you for arranging that. Perfect. Is there anyone else?
Not that I see. Sonia is our last participant, but I don't see a hand raised.
Okay. Okay. Well, with that, thank you so much for everyone who's participated. And I'd like to open it up to the board for discussion and potentially other questions. So I'll open it up. If you want to speak, you raise your hand. Awesome. Danny, you can go ahead.
Just regarding some of the procedural issues and the timeframes and potential overlap with the ordinance and the state structure. Frankly, there's a big difference between 20 days overall and 10 and 10. There are a lot of things that I like in the ordinance that I think work really well. And so I don't see it as something that's not necessary because the state has their own set of regulations and the city's laid this out based on its particular considerations. And just, for example, 10 days to approve or deny, and then another 10 days to provide a reasonable cause for doing so is a lot different than 20 days to make that decision collectively. And so I like the structure that the ordinance has in regards to a lot of these things and a lot of the time frames, and the fact that we talked about it before. I think Jacques brought it up, but there's a lot of basically a lot of very I think Terry actually said it. There's a lot of very tight considerations when you're dealing with any sort of real estate transaction. So time's absolutely of the essence, and having something that structures all that together, I think, is really important. And so I like what the regulation's trying to do, and I like some of the steps that it takes to accomplish what it's trying to do.
Go ahead, Judy.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you to the great speakers, and also thank you to the many people who sent us emails. I had a virtual meeting with a homeowner, and I basically asked 3 questions. I asked, is there anything in there that you don't want? And she said no. I said, is there anything in there that you think should be added? And she said no. And I said, what is it that you want the most? And she said, for this to happen really quickly. And she was delighted that we had moved our meeting up till today so that we could go ahead. But what she was most interested in, and what she feels most of the homeowners are most interested in, is this moving swiftly. She felt that Crystal had done a lot of work on this. And so I have no questions at all myself. I just to let everyone know, we'll be voting just to approve it without changes.
Thanks, Judy. What else? Are there comments or anything from other members? Okay. Well, Judy, I appreciate your comments, and Danny as well as all the speakers. I'm so grateful that you all came, and I really appreciate all the emails as well. You know, this seems like an easy decision for me. You know, not only does this protect, you know, homeowners, it provides more transparency, not only for homeowners and landlords by setting those clear expectations, but ultimately fosters greater diversity, protects our diverse city, and you know, prevents homeowners from being taken advantage of. And so I have no changes. Just wanted to let everyone know that I do support this, and we'll be voting on it accordingly. But are there other comments before we move to a vote on this? Because we will vote on whether we approve it as is tonight. Okay. Not seeing anything. Okay. Well, with that, then, oops. I will put forward a motion to approve, let me see, to approve Ordinance 8432 as is, for City Council to discuss at their next meeting for first reading.
Crystal, do you want to bring up the
I have a
motion
question.
language? Sorry,
What?
go ahead.
Oh, sorry. What?
I just had a question. Are we voting on approving this, or are we voting on recommending that council review and approve as is?
Yeah, so we're approving what I'm proposing. Apologies if that wasn't clear. I am proposing that we approve this, the ordinance as is, for council to review at their next meeting. And I believe that will be first reading. Jay, is that correct?
Correct. Yes. And then the motion language that we have up for you might be the easiest.
Okay, yeah, so there it is. It's up on the screen now. Oh, so that's really helpful.
We will always provide that for you.
Thanks. Juliet, does that make sense now that it's up there?
I don't see it, so, but I must not be looking at the right screen here. So here we go.
Look at your Zoom.
Yeah. So we're recommending. We're not necessarily. I just didn't think we had the power to vote yes or no on something. I think we're voting to recommend that they
as is, and
that
I'll
they adopt it. Yeah.
Okay.
That's all. I just wanted to clarify that.
Yep. No, for sure. Thanks. So I'm going to move forward with this then. So motion to recommend City Council adopt Ordinance 8432, revising Chapter 12, mobile homes by amending sections 10, 12, 25, limitation on the prohibition of sales of mobile homes, and 10, 12, 26, limitation on the required upgrades to existing mobile homes, BRC 1981, and setting forth related details.
I'll second.
Okay, seconded, and then all
Who seconded? Sorry.
Jacques.
Thank you.
All right, all in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right. Okay, it looks like we have 6, 7. Okay, passes unanimously. Perfect.
Charlotte, I have a question. Is it okay for Crystal to mention that that we did have, you'll probably do this anyway, but we did have a number of people speaking. We did get a number of emails, and that we supported enthusiastically, something like that.
Yeah, for sure. And Corey, you are taking notes, is that right?
Correct.
Okay. Maybe you can just include that in the notes. And then in terms of communicating this to council, Jay, is that something that you'll do?
Crystal will do it in the memo. She'll basically explain what the recommendation was. And she can put in the word enthusiastically in there too, if you would like.
I think that's fine. Okay, great. Again, thank you everyone who attended. You can stay or not for the remainder of the meeting, but Crystal, thank you for orchestrating this, and really appreciate it. Hope this moves forward swiftly as many homeowners are hoping.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you, Crystal.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
Bye.
Thank you. Have a good night. All right. That went by much faster than I thought it was going to, so that's kind of nice. We'll move on to public participation ahead of schedule. And it looks like someone has entered the waiting room. Corey, are you going to let them in?
Yep, they just came in.
Okay, great. So this is a time where speakers can talk about anything. They are not confined to talk about any particular subject, as was the case for the public hearing. So if you would like to speak during public participation, will you please raise your hand? Oh, and we do not need interpretation for the rest of the meeting. Is that correct?
Mhm.
That's correct.
Correct.
Okay, perfect.
Bye,
Thank
Marina. Thank you.
much.
Marina.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Enjoy your evening. Bye. Okay, perfect. So as I said, if you'd like to speak, would you please raise your hand, and you can, Corey,
I don't see anyone raising their hand at
will
this
you
time.
explain how to raise your hand again?
Sure. In the menu, you click on participants at the bottom if you hover with your mouse. Look for your name in the participants list. You'll see two blue buttons. One of them says more. And when you click on that, it should have the icon of the little hand that raises. And I think participants have a different view than the hosts of the meeting.
Okay. That makes sense.
If you're struggling to find where that's located, you can also just send me a chat. And that's in the menu as well at the bottom.
Just give folks a second here, maybe to find their hand if they want to speak. Okay.
Charlotte, it might also just be, since there are only two, you may be able to just unmute them and ask them directly.
Okay, that's true. I think that might be the phone number for.
It is. That's Renee's phone number. And then Anna is new to the meeting. I think she just joined here a couple minutes ago.
I'll ask to unmute and see if they'd like to speak.
Thank you.
Hi, sorry. I don't have a comment. I was just late to the meeting because I had the time wrong. Sorry.
Oh no, that's fine. Just wanted to make sure that if you wanted to speak, you can. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, of course. Thanks for coming. Okay, so I don't think we have any speakers.
Okay.
Okay, great. We can move on to the approval of minutes from December 16th, 2020. Are there any changes? Yeah, Judy, go ahead.
I just have a little tiny correction. It says that
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Judy.
It says that for the joint committee, we were presenting our reports to HAB and to HRC, and it said December 2021, but we already presented it in December 2020. That's all. It's just the wrong date.
Great.
I corrected.
Thanks, Jay. Okay. I have no changes. Are there any other changes? Okay. Seeing none, I will put forward a motion to approve the minutes from December 16th, 2020. Seconded by Mason's hand, and all in favor. All right, passes unanimously. Beautiful. Okay. So we'll move on to matters from the board. But first, I just wanted to say something to the board before we move on. I've been thinking a lot about the condition of our country and our world right now, and as violence and strife and division ensue across the country, there lies great potential in this board for meaningful and positive local change here. And the power that each of you hold, as board members is, I think, more than it's more than I know, and certainly more than we've realized. And while our role here entails advising city council, developing and recommending policy solutions, as we just did, the potential of this board to affect positive change is immense in our community. And if I do anything as chair here, my hope is to infuse this body, this group of people, with energy and empathy and sense of responsibility. I hope that you all recognize the responsibility that you have here. Housing is so important. It's the foundation for life, for emotional and physical health, for child development, economic mobility, and so much more. My hope is that you harness this power as a member of this board, towards a positively impactful end. And I urge you to, just meditate on this, this power, and consider how you're using it. Not using your power here to advance just and equitable and positive change would not only be just doing a disservice to yourself, to your own potential as a leader, but also, and more importantly, to the city and to this community. So help people. We're here to help people, and help people who need it, have empathy. And that may sound like a platitude, but all positive change begins with empathy. And that's just something I've been thinking about, and I just wanted to share that with you all. And so I'll just want to put it out there. Okay, we can move on to committee and project liaison reports. So Judy, I wanted to turn it over to you. Do you have any updates or anything you'd like to share?
Well, we've made our presentation to HAB, we sent the report to HAB. HRC had the report go there. We've sent it to council last week, but we have disbanded as far as having any more meetings. We're done with that. We'll answer individual questions that people have or that council may have. And we've had some questions come to us from council. But the one thing I wanted to discuss is either now or that you perhaps set aside a meeting as an agenda point in the future is, what does HAB want to do about people who are unhoused in Boulder? And in my opinion, from having spent all that time in that committee, an oversight committee is something that I think is still lacking and still needed. And what the county is doing, to the best we could find out, and we talked to people in the county about it for quite some time. We had a specific meeting with them. It's fine, but it doesn't really cover the things we're interested in. And I think HRC is going to do what HRC is going to do about unhoused issues. I think safe parking either will happen or is happening. I think there's promise for tiny homes, perhaps encampments. There's certainly a need for more data collection, but the oversight committee is something that's really sorely lacking. And it's up to you if you guys want to take it up or not.
Thanks, Judy. Other comments? I'm thinking, but are there any comments from others? Judy, maybe you can expand upon what your hopes are. Sorry if I missed something, but like what would you like to see moving forward? Oh, you're muted.
I incorrectly thought I had unmuted. It's really not up to me because this is one of my last couple of meetings because I time off the board. But I think that it's a topic of the unhoused in Boulder is huge and of great importance to us, to HAB. And we had this whole list of recommendations. And on the committee, since we knew we couldn't do everything, we looked at the ones that we thought were perhaps most doable or that didn't cost the city money, since they had put that request upon us that there was no point in doing anything that would cost the city money. So I think there are still things that need looking at. And I think there are people out there who need help. And I think there are sensible solutions out there to enhance housing first, that don't contradict housing first, but that help provide transitional options for people into permanently affordable housing. So yeah, I hope, my only hope is that HAB keeps up on the issue in whatever way HAB as a group wants to do so.
Okay. Yeah. Have you gotten a sense from the other members on HRC about what topics they are interested in looking at? Or like, yeah.
Well, what they're most interested in now is the most pressing thing for them, I think right now, is the language of not saying that people who don't use a shelter are shelter resistant, because that sounds like they just refuse to go to the shelter. It's that they can't for one reason or another, and they object to the wording, which does change the orientation behind everything. So there are people who don't use the shelter who are homeless because they don't want to be split from their families, or they don't have any place to put their car, and it's the only thing they have left in the world, or they don't want to be separated from their beloved pet, or they have things like PTSD that prohibit them from being in a congregate situation. So I think that's their interest, of course, isn't as much on housing as in other kinds of services. Ours, of course, seems more naturally. When we talked about it before, it led to Jacques and Terry pursuing tiny homes in a more broad sense, which I think is great. But I just hope the unhoused population isn't forgotten on HAB.
No, absolutely. So it sounds like HRC, they're looking kind of more semantically at the intent behind the language used. Is that right?
Yeah, but they're pretty active and very interested in it. So it could change all the time. They could.
Okay. Well, I want to open it up to the board to see, and Judy, I mean, you've been on the committee for a while, and I know Mason was on it for a bit. So where do we want to do moving forward, right? These issues aren't going away just because we have a vaccine, right? They've only been these issues have only been exacerbated by the pandemic, and are worth our continual exploration and attention. So how would the board like to move forward? Maybe we don't have to decide now, but we don't meet for another month. So what do we want to do with the momentum behind this committee? Is there another, is there any interest from another member of the board to delve into it? Judy, I know you're gone in March, and it would be a shame for that to go away. It's definitely been, it's offered rich, conversation and lots of substance. So gonna get some thoughts if there are any. Yes, we can think about it. You can think about it. If there are no comments right now, we can always revisit it. You know, if later in the meeting you have a revelation, then you can just speak up and we can talk about it, but okay. Then I'll move on. Judy, are you good with that? Okay. Then I'm gonna move on to Jacques, Terry, and Danny. I want to hear about where you'd like to take this committee. You know, last meeting, the conversation was less about tiny homes. It moved away from tiny homes and towards you know, the conversation of you know, ADUs, and you know, that's fine. It's just not the intent of this committee, and that's, you know, again, that's fine. I just want to get a sense of where you want to put your energy in researching, investigating, and discussion. So yeah, maybe you guys can speak to that, or what you want to do. Mm-hmm.
All right, am I unmuted?
Terry, Jacques, go ahead. Sorry.
You took the words right out of my mouth. It's one of the things I wanted to bring up is, you know, I don't think a lot happened by way of our committee over the holidays, other than it feels like, and I think I shared some emails with Jacques, that a new type of tiny home is popping up everywhere. Pre-made ones, they'll deliver them to your backyard. They're different countries. There's just so many options out there, and it seems like there's more and more every day. Housing affordability in our country, not just in Boulder, it's getting more and more out of reach. So the tiny home movement, I think, is and I'm talking fixed foundation tiny homes, is picking up steam. It seems like, from everything that I'm seeing and articles I'm reading and all that kind of stuff. So that's great, in my opinion. I think that's really good that the more options that are out there by way of manufacturers, people that are willing to deliver them and set them up, more competition drives prices down. So I think that's all very good as far as a very macro level. Now, how do we bring that to Boulder and get more of them in place? How do we get more rooftops in Boulder by way of fixed foundation tiny homes? I think, Jay, in our last meeting, there was I think I remember you mentioning that there had been a memo or something that had outlined the hurdles or the biggest obstacles to getting more, we'll call them ADUs, tiny homes. I think we're kind of using those two terms synonymously at this point. I think that would be good to look at that, just so we understand, you know, what somebody else, the legwork somebody else has done already as far as the obstacles for putting more tiny homes in our community. But I agree with you, Charlotte. What can we do as a board to help facilitate this, help move it forward? Is it just a recommendation? And maybe this is more of a question for Jay, I don't know. But is it just a recommendation to City Council saying, hey, we need to loosen up these regulations, or we need to make the regulations, I don't know, we need to do something to allow more ADU/tiny homes in our community? But I agree with you in that, what can we get done this year to help make that happen? And I don't have the answer necessarily, but I'm again encouraged by so many different choices in the marketplace, so many different options, big, small, modern, contemporary, traditional, 2-story, 1-story, you name it, it's out there, and pricing isn't crazy. So anyway, I'll stop with that, but that's kind of my update on that level.
Mm-hmm. Mason, do you have a comment on Terry, or because Jacques was after Terry, but if you have something to comment on, I want to let you comment.
He asked a bunch of great questions, and Sarah's on planning board. She would probably know what our hurdles are and could speak to it.
This is true. Does it make sense, Jacques, for you to speak next? And that, do you have something to build upon? And then, you know, we can ask Sarah to elaborate on.
Yeah, I can go ahead and add in kind of where I'm at. It's kind of following up with Terry, the question of like, where can we go or what might we be able to do? And I agree this kind of shifted from a tiny home focus to this greater kind of ADU question for me, because one of the pieces here I think Terry agrees with this one, is that it's like, how can we increase the acquisition rate for ADUs within the city of Boulder? Terry's been mentioning, and I got numbers. Jay, thanks for sending those numbers to me. Oh, and Jay, on an aside, it might be great if you just sent that report that you sent me today from years back to everybody. That'd be good, because it kind of refreshes what we did in the lead up when the HAB was first kind of getting to work. But there are, and by some numbers that I got from Jay today, there are some 12,000, almost 12,500 properties that have the potential for an ADU on them within the city. Right now, just roughly, we're maybe around 3% of those, I think, that have already, some 400 that have an ADU permitted. And so how do we increase the kind of acquisition rate for ADUs? And I kind of am seeing three things. This is what's come up. I sent you guys this little brief document that I've been putting together. And it basically breaks it down into a couple of things. I think one of the first ones is the funding. And we haven't yet followed up with the discussion last time about looking at funding and what does it cost for a door, for an affordable housing door within the city, and can ADUs really help in that respect? Right now we're spending our funds in other places, but does it maybe make sense to look at those funds going towards supporting more ADUs being built in some way? So that was the one thing I think is worth looking at, is just how we're going to look at funding it. There's a couple things that I have over the last 2 months I've been looking into it. There are interesting funding mechanisms that exist in the private sector that I'm finding that are simply ways to get funding, because there's a little bit of a problem in funding an ADU with the current structures for mortgages. Unless you have the ability to just go in for a HELOC, there's problems to get funding for it in other ways. So that starts to limit the pool already. And one of those ways that was really interesting is companies that simply sign on to part of the equity in your home. And these are some pretty huge structures, actually, financially, that are in the market, and they're buying all over the country into people's homes, so that instead of having to get a standard loan and pay a monthly payment on it, you're just saying, hey, at the end of the day, when I sell my property, I will, I'll give you X percentage for you paying me that percentage in cash now, an equivalent percentage. So they realize the appreciation of the property over time. And, that's just one interesting thing that's happening out there around this. So it can help people fund ADUs, and that's one of their focus areas. The other one that I found is in Boston, in LA, in Napa, and I think it's happening in other places also. They are putting together programs that are public or public-private partnerships that are providing funding for ADUs specifically. And these funding mechanisms are usually zero interest and paid back in a variety of ways, but usually paid back upon sale of the house. So that's another thing I think we could look at and start to discuss. This is kind of similar to what we're doing with the middle income down payment assistance. It would be kind of an equivalent and maybe a parallel program to that could be looked at. So those are some of the financing options that I see that might be out there. The other piece that I've started looking into, and actually just before the meeting, I did get an email back from Will Birchfield, who is the head building official in the city of Boulder, regarding the possibility of creating pre-approved construction documents for people who want to put an ADU in their backyard. And that's just one piece that I think we could look at trying to move forward. And Will he's looked into it to a certain degree. We know we have problems with PUDs because they have limitations on ADUs potentially within the city. So some of these lots that we see as could have an ADU, they can from the city's perspective, but they can't because they're these planned developments which have rules limiting such things. So there are other limitations, but he's looking into the ability of the city to use some sort of a pre-approved plan set that a homeowner could save the architectural fees. And that would also significantly shorten the timeline for people too, to a certain degree. So that was one of the pieces that ties in a little bit to cost. The other one would be to look into fee waivers for the city. Saying we will waive fees if, based on affordability for that unit. One thing that's really interesting in the document, I can't remember which document it is. It's either the one Jay sent me today or the Turner Center report that was linked to the PDF that I sent out to you guys, where, and I think this came from you, Jay, actually also, that they're seeing that any ADU, whether it's deeded permanently affordable or not, on average rents at a significantly discounted rate. So we might want to look at the whole concept of permanently affordably deeded and how we have engaged with that, because it seems like it's a win either way. But so the standard pre-approved plans, fee waivers, and then another piece that goes along with the pre-approved plans is just the permitting process and streamlining it. And Charlotte, you can probably speak to this a little bit, but we have a program right now for getting an ADU that requires you to first do the ADU application process, even though they are effectively by right under certain, conditions in these areas. And that's a lengthy process that you go through. And then after that process, then you submit your building plans for building permit approval. And my perspective on that is that one thing we might look at is streamlining that process and putting them, kind of hand in glove so that we take some of the time off the plate and also the effort and cost for homeowners. So that was kind of the permitting piece of it. And then the final piece, and this is a place where I know Terry and I still diverge somewhat, but I'm still looking into the mobile tiny home, and I'm still asking the question why mobile tiny homes are not considered as any other tiny home or ADU. I put some of those realities of the code down on that document that I sent out to you guys. But basically, mobile homes are managed under an existing code. The key reality here is that the city's code and the manufactured housing code all address what has to happen to put a home, a manufactured home of any size, on a pad. So the question is, if the city could come to amend our ADU ordinance in such a way that it simply says homeowners can create pads on their property for ADUs of a certain, or for mobile ADUs, as I call them, MADUs, of a certain square footage. And I think that it's worth looking at that square footage number, because I don't know that we want to say, hey, let's start dropping, 1,000 square foot structures in the backyard just because they qualify as a mobile ADU. So those are kind of the three areas that I see where we could push forward. And I think our committee could continue to work on those areas as each of us has an interest. So anyway, I would say just look at that piece, that document that I threw out there today. There's some great links to the Backyard Home Project. And Unison you can check out. They are in there. I don't have a link to them, but you can just, I think, Google them online, or I'll send a link out. The main piece that I've seen from all of this that I think we need to keep pushing on is we can see, and again, this is from that Turner Center report, you can see that ADU numbers for permitting do about what's been happening in Boulder once you make them legal. And the key thing that increases the number of ADUs appears to be financial relief in some form or another. And once you get financial relief, that really starts to increase the numbers. So in any one of these ways, if we could get some financial relief, that'd be great. And for me, the mobile ADUs is just a matter of, it provides financial relief to the homeowner because they don't have to put as much into it. And it gives an equity stake. You know, we can argue about how good it is, but I think that the people who own those tiny homes on wheels would feel that they have an equity stake in that, and it gives them a piece of the pie, so to speak. So that's it from my side.
Thanks, Jack.
Mhm.
That was a lot of great stuff.
Sorry.
No, I wanted to open it up because Sarah, you're here from Planning Board. Maybe you can speak to some of the questions raised. And then I have some questions for you within the context of what Terry and Jacques just spoke about.
Well, I haven't looked at ADU regs for a while, so I'm speaking from my memory. I think the reason, my recollection is that the reason why mobile tiny homes are not currently allowed in the city is that the design and construction engineers of the city specifically requested that if there were to be tiny homes approved for use in Boulder, that they would have to be on fixed foundations. And that fixed foundation requirement was to ensure that those homes met livability standards, and that the city could go in and evaluate the livability of those particular dwelling units. That's my recollection. Jay, maybe I am recollecting incorrectly, but
I mean, I wouldn't disagree with what you just said. It wasn't necessarily an explicit part of the conversation during the ADU update. It simply didn't come up. I mean, it was out of scope if it did come up.
right. But it did come up through the, when I can't remember the gentleman's name who brings us the design and construction standards, but it was a discussion during that process, separate from the ADU ordinance.
Okay. Yeah, see, I wasn't part of that, so.
Yeah.
So sorry.
No. So when Terry brought up the fixed foundation ADU framing, I think that's probably I would suggest that that's the more fruitful path to go on than to try to change the design and construction standards that the city uses. Yeah, sorry, Jacques.
No, that's okay, Sarah. I just wanted to jump in because I think I have a similar recollection, actually, that at the point in time when we were working on this, that the fixed foundation piece was an important part. But I think one of the reasons in the livability standards, this was prior to Appendix Q being adopted, which Appendix Q details, so it brings the IRC, it brings tiny homes into compliance with the International Residential Code. And I think that's where most of that conflict was. And so I think that now there's really almost no conflict there, any that I've seen. I've dug into the code a fair bit, and that's my point, where I think it's just an old hiccup, basically, which is potentially limiting the use of units that are already constructed, people already own, and could potentially be put to use. So I think between Appendix E, which is the mobile home stuff, I think if I get that right, and Appendix Q, which is the tiny home stuff, really all it comes to is, and this would be the zoning piece of it, would be the city saying, hey, we can allow effectively a mobile home pad in these zoning areas or on these types of lots in order to support that type of structure.
So that's an interesting idea.
Yeah.
I think just from a, I think you'd have to really think through what it would mean to extend mobile home zoning to all the other zones or whatever other zones in the city that you might want to extend it to, given that the city's zoning for mobile homes is permanent. They permanently zoned the mobile home zones for manufactured home neighborhoods, precisely so that that land could not get sold out from under the residents whose homes are sitting on someone else's land. So I think you'd have, it would, I don't know what the solution to that would be, but I think it could be a challenge to extend allowing mobile home zoning in non-mobile home zones. I just think it might create a situation that the city might not want to create.
Yeah.
Maybe you need a new zone or something.
Well,
but
yeah, I don't think that I may have misspoken or I didn't speak clearly. I don't think that we would do what you're saying, because I agree that's all kinds of, I think, potential issues there. I think that we would just allow within those zones the creation of a pad. In other words, you don't have to bring all the other pieces of the mobile home regulatory structure into play, but you would allow creation of a pad, and then you would simply require that those people would meet essentially it's the tie down and foundation requirements of the mobile home structure.
Okay, I mean, yeah, I could see some.
This is the place that needs some kind of grist.
Yeah, I could see some other challenges. I mean, not saying it's a good idea or a bad idea, but I can see some other challenges that have to do with the parking requirements that go along with the ADUs, with design requirements, and my recollection of the last time we had the conversation at planning board about the design of ADUs, they proposed some changes in the design of ADUs, I think in order to allow maybe some more creativity. I can't really remember what the motive was, but I think you'd have to just explore whether or not tiny homes on wheels meet the design requirements. And I have no idea whether they do or not. Parking, I think, is an issue in the sense, I don't mean that it means that there's an additional car in the neighborhood, but rather the way the ADU regs are written, as I remember, is there are parking requirements, off-street parking requirements for an ADU on your property, and a tiny home on wheels. They're almost by definition, there's got to be an automobile or some sort of wheeled vehicle that is associated with it. And I'm not sure how a pad versus a unit that has a parking space attached to it or next to it. I just think there's a lot of questions that would have to be explored.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I just think that I think it's probably worth going down. As I see it, actually, I'd love to talk to you further about this, or we can have some emails. But I think we can meet all the ADU requirements as they currently exist. I don't think there's any need to shift those, including the parking stuff. But that's probably an ongoing discussion for sure.
Awesome. Danny, you had your hand up a while ago. Did you have a comment?
Yeah, I think that a lot of this, I mean, in terms of, we would make sure that we define this specifically as not a mobile home. Just because it's mobile in nature doesn't mean it's a mobile home. You know, there's a lot of things you can do by legislative or regulatory fiat here to really kind of structure something so that you don't run into these issues. And I think, you know, we've always talked about how the regulatory framework really is something that can be looked at in terms of catalyzing, the opportunity to have more, affordable housing to begin with. And this absolutely being something, as both Terry and Jacques really pointed out, that's remarkably affordable, relatively speaking, to everything else we're looking at, and affordable in terms of being able to get something like essentially a new unit and get it erected, get it put in place. I think a lot of these things, there's a lot of ways to do it, just in terms of how you define things and how you draft some regulations to incentivize it, if that's the route that we want to go. And I think it absolutely merits exploration. Both, the mobile tiny home and the fixed tiny home. Again, I made this point a few months ago, but just based on the open house that we had and a lot of the comments and the fact that a lot of people were really focused on the mobile tiny home. But so I really feel, again, that this is something where whatever regulatory obstacles there are a lot of ways that we can kind of navigate around it pretty adroitly without having to say, well, it doesn't meet the regs and just kind of give up on it. Because anything we could do in this regard, I think it'd be terrific. And, the ADU, I think the ADU avenue is really the way to try to get this going too. So, sorry about that. My computer's connected to my phone. Anyhow, but that's my point. So, and I think that's definitely something that we can explore, and where there's some potential fruit there down the road if we can figure that out.
No, for sure. Mason, you've had your hand up for a while.
Jacques, did you look at the language of how Lions did it? I'm not sure that it's a overlay, but they did not change their land use code. So that might be something to look into. And Sarah had said something about the cars with tiny houses. Most of the individuals I know at Tiny Houses on Wheels actually either rent a U-Haul to move it because they don't want to move it that often, or there's a service that moves tiny houses around. So it is something, those kinds of things would be great, like what you're talking about, to make sure that we don't automatically make those assumptions when we're looking at all of the questions that would be around tiny houses on wheels.
Mm-hmm. Jay, you're.
Yeah, I was just going to suggest, one of the big ahas for me from the listening session on tiny homes is just that, what is the difference between a tiny home on wheels versus a detached ADU, right? One's on wheels, one's on a fixed foundation. You can put skirting around the wheels, and some of the images we saw, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. So that's where I was like, well, okay, that makes sense to me. And if you think about a property owner who may not want to put that ADU or make that investment in a fixed foundation, they may only want it for a short period of time. And it allows for that sort of the person that owns it, who's looking for a place to park it, an opportunity. So anyway, that was the big takeaway from the listening session. I think that's just important to keep in mind. That's it.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of my clients here in Colorado, California ask all the time, can I move it? Can I move it? And it's, the company I work at, we do, fixed foundations, but that is definitely a want. Folks want to bring that with them so that they can house, an aging parent and then a child. So that is really interesting to consider. Jacques.
I was going to say, just to that point, Charlotte, also, the foundational requirements and the mobile aspect doesn't necessarily even mean wheels. As you're saying, you could take one of your products, one of the small ones, or one of the larger ones, and you can crane it and lift it over a house. Well, I mean, if it was designed properly for that, right? Maybe not what you're building right now, but there are companies that are doing that, and they're driving them up on a flatbed and they're craning them and putting them in, and then you can bolt them to a foundation. So it's really just a question of how do we anchor these things down? And I do think that was one of the city's, the building officials' concerns. They didn't want these things, they didn't just want a wheeled unit just parked there and then 160-mile-per-hour gust come along and tip it over. So I think it's a pretty minimal lift, quite honestly.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mason.
Which again, Blissful Tiny Homes and Lions went through the whole certification for tie downs, and it's the same tri-state company that certifies the whole tiny house industry for communities interested in having them. And I don't know of, in all the years that Simplicity's been in operation, of anyone blowing over. Other things that can be in our storage containers as well. Storage containers are movable and can be cleaned in as well.
Yeah, Terry.
I think all those are great comments and good input. So I kind of go back to where I started was, how do we move this forward? How do we see if the city is willing to help finance some of these tiny homes if they were permanently affordable? How do we see if we can get some pre-approved plans for 6 or 7 different choices, so the approval entitlement process and permitting process is more streamlined? The financing side is, to me, I think that there's a lot of private people, banks and whatnot, that'll finance these. If you look at the big round numbers, big round development numbers, if a tiny home even costs, on a fixed foundation, costs even $100,000, which I'm very confident for a couple 300 square feet, you can put a foundation in and build one, even stick frame, not pre-made, for $100,000. Even if you borrowed all the money to do that. And I think people in Boulder have borrowing power more than most, and equity in their homes more than most. So even if you got a HELOC or something along those lines, and it was $100,000, which is high. That's a high number for a 300 square foot backyard tiny home. The payment on that is $400, and I'm very confident that you would rent these to people in need for, say, $1,000. To find a place to live in Boulder for $1,000 a month, that's your own place, no shared walls. Yes, it may be in somebody's backyard, but that's the greatest deal in town, right? For the renter, and then for the homeowner that owns it, they're getting a very good return on their investment. So I think the money is there. To me, it's more getting it approved, getting it permitted, and getting it built. And so how do we take where we are and get to where we can advise or suggest or whatever we need to do, to the council to say, hey, we need to allow more of these. We need to make the regulations easier. We need to make the entitlement faster. We need to, that's what we need to do. How do we do that? And maybe that's a question for Jay. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm really interested in the idea of pre-approved plans, and I wanted to know if planning board has ever had that discussion or like explored that idea of like some, or if that's even in the purview of planning board. Sarah, I'm not sure.
The only time that I know of that planning board has done something in the category of pre-approved would have been our form-based code work over at the Transit Village. And I design advisory board are the folks who do the design stuff. So you'd probably have to end up talking to them. But I would think that there'd be some, while that there'd have to be a balance between the idea of some handful of pre-approved designs and the desire to make sure that neighborhoods don't end up looking like there's a design aesthetic that not in every neighborhood, and it's not perfect at all, but if you end up with 5 ADU styles and they're in every backyard. And of course I'm exaggerating here, but it could just, it might not be exactly what DAB or the city exactly wants. So I just think it's something to think through.
Yeah, I remember when, oh. Sorry.
Here's, I understand what you're saying and completely agree with you. We don't want 6 tiny home exteriors in there in every backyard. Nobody wants that. I think maybe though, what Jacques is saying, or if he's not, this is what I'm saying is, maybe it's not how it looks, right? It's not the architectural look on the outside, but it's if you provide a 10 by 20 foundation, 2 stories, yada, yada, and you lay out basic criteria, a little bit like form-based code, and you provide the criteria saying, if you deliver this, if you submit this, irrespective of if the outside has a flat roof or a pitch, you can play with the way it looks, but the bulk of it, the foundation of it, the square footage of it, all that could be sort of streamlined as far as pre-approved goes. So it's not necessarily just, okay, we have an A-frame, a gable roof and it's got asphalt shingles and that's it. Yeah. I'm saying, or what I'm thinking when you say pre-approved, Jacques, is we have a foundation size, right? Pick the number, 12 by 20. I don't know what it is. We have materials that are on the outside, lap siding or whatever it is. If you provide this, if you submit this, it's going to get approved. There's no major back and forth, is I think what I'm thinking you're saying, Jacques. But if I'm putting words in your mouth, then that's what I'm saying.
I think Terry and Sarah, it's a little bit of both, because there's 2 aspects. One is the approval of the structure. And I think that's what you're alluding to a little bit. And that is one of the things that I want to, streamline. But the other piece of it is the cost to the homeowner. And streamlining it takes some of that cost out. That's one of the slices. But another slice is the cost to have myself or Charlotte or someone else actually take the time to do that design for your property. And that's probably the greater cost, quite honestly. So I'm looking at trying to hit both of those, to push a little bit back on, if we only have these 6, and I could say, why have 6? It's, we could have 20 or 30 of these different design styles. We don't even have to necessarily specify cladding. So it's going, we could push it a little bit towards that more form-based situation. But I had a little smile because I said, well, if we do end up with these in everybody's yard, then everybody wants them, and that's great. And nobody's going to mind that it's in the neighbor's yard because they all chose it. So if we can get to that point, I don't think we'll have a problem with the fact that we have a limited set of plans. But the reality is we aren't going to get to that point. They're going to be randomly and rarefied in their kind of acquisition around the city. So I don't know that that's really a viable or a valid kind of argument against doing this. But I do recognize that kind of overall concern. We don't want to turn into, left in a bunch of little boxes that all look exactly the same and put it together like that. So anyway, I think there's lots to discuss in all of these things. And I would like to just see us, if the board thinks it's worthwhile, just continue on the path of trying to define more clearly what the potential spaces for change are. And then see how, as Terry's saying, how we go ahead and move those forward.
Jacques, I'm wondering if there's a group, a potential for collaboration, Sarah mentioned the design advisory board, which group of people would it be for us to, actually talk about the pragmatics of this and what is possible. I'm not sure if that's the design advisory board. I mean, I was just thinking about how, I think it was 2 years ago now, the aesthetic regulations for ADUs were loosened, right? Which is amazing. So we don't want a bunch of identical boxes for sure. We don't want to become Levittown of ADUs. But that's a side point. Judy, did you have a comment?
Yes, I was just wondering about the potential of a next step, possibly being for Jacques and or Terry to get some input and possibly an ally, which would make it way more possible within the planning department, because they have really good ideas. They know all the regulations, they know what's possible and not, and you could discuss, you speak their language. You know, I'm just wondering about that as a possibility.
Jay, you're smiling. Wait, are you that ally?
I've offered.
I think that we made an attempt at the end of last meeting, and we didn't quite put that together yet. So yeah, I'd like to see us try to do that. And Jay, I can try to find some time here in the next couple of weeks and
Let's do it.
get your input on it.
Absolutely.
I think one of the questions, just real quick, one of the questions that kind of sidetracked that was we also brought Danny into the mix. And then I had a question if that was problematic because of our numbers. Having the three of us in a meeting with Jay, and it may just need to be two of us in some way. So we'll just, I think, just sort that out, and then we can put something together. That'd be great. And Charlotte, to your point, I definitely think that obviously we need to speak with somebody. And Sarah, maybe you have some suggestions for us, you know, to get someone on planning board also who could help us kind of wrap our heads around what the speed bumps are from that side as well.
Great.
So we can't have so many people that we have quorum. So I'm not sure if quorum's 3 or 4, Jay, under the bylaws, but if we have 3 of us, we can't all meet together.
It's 3, so we should probably start with just 2.
Yeah.
And alternate depending on the topic, maybe. Making any decisions.
Jump in and out of the room or yeah.
So Jacques, I'm happy to sit down or talk with you via Zoom or have a socially distant coffee or something. I'd like to just suggest one other, since you guys are talking about what else you all could be focusing on. I don't know how closely you read the planning board's letter to city council, but one of the things we're very interested in is the council moving forward on the use table update. And in one of our big areas of interest is transforming our old worn out shopping areas, which are mostly zoned BC1 and BC2, not exclusively, into housing oriented neighborhood centers. Sort of think along the lines of Holiday. So human scaled, very diverse types of housing, a little higher density, along that are and are incorporated with the kind of shopping areas that the neighborhood center and the surrounding neighborhoods need. And I think that if we could move that forward, you'd see the opportunity for a lot more dwelling units to come online that are in a neighborhood that also create new neighborhoods. So if that was something that, it would be great if that was something you all could turn your attention to as well, because I do think it would help advance the housing agenda.
Yes, Jacques.
Jay, that was actually one of the questions I had, where kind of just to get an update, maybe at next meeting, on where the process stands. I noticed that on the city website, it says that it's kind of gotten slowed down by COVID. They said check on track, but then next to it, it said that the impact from COVID was high and things weren't moving, I think, if I looked at it correctly. So that was one of the things that I was looking that maybe we can get kind of updated on. And I think that came out of my work on this stuff with the ADU tiny home thing. And just along those lines exactly, Sarah, was where do we stand on the use table updates?
I just added it to the work plan, which we'll talk about in 2 items.
Okay, thank you.
Awesome. Are there any other comments about this conversation? I'm potentially interested in hearing more about this group. Are you all leaning towards focusing? Well, it seems like you're in an exploration phase, ADUs and tiny homes. So I don't want to put parameters at all, but just something to think about. Tiny home. This began as like a tiny home / tiny home villages. Investigative group, and now it's in a different direction. So I'm fine with that, but it's just something to think about, and the group, the community that serves, probably different. So
yeah, to bring that back, Charlotte, I do agree. Part of the initial discussion, and I think some of that was based on or predicated on Sam Weaver's comments at some point somewhere about finding land for a tiny home village. Maybe we should kind of redirect a little bit of energy back towards looking at that as well.
Yeah, Mason.
Yeah, in conjunction with what Jacques just saying, is to bring it back full loop, is the original conversation around tiny houses was with the Unhoused 2020 plan, identifying the fact that in our coordinated entry trajectory, what was happening is that individuals who were coming off of being unhoused, going into temporary house, or being integrated into stable apartment communities, were struggling with the new lifestyle or the new situation that we were in. And what we realized was that there was a whole huge need for transitional living. So tiny houses as transitional living, creating a community for individuals who were dealing with recovery, as we know, is not easy. So throwing somebody who's in recovery and coming off the streets into a stable home environment can sometimes disrupt not only the apartment complex, but the individual themselves. However, taking the baby step into a transitional living situation, such as tiny houses are providing in communities with like-minded individuals, was creating more of a success ramp than, so that's originally how tiny houses, we were talking about with the development from the listening session out in Longmont that Judy had brought in as well. Mm-hmm. That's why I don't want us to forget about that portion of the population that desperately needs attention.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's why, the focus on ADUs is great. Love it. We just have to think about, who is this serving? Who is that? Who are those projects serving? And, who are we serving by, investing time and energy into what a tiny home village in Boulder could look like. So, yeah, we don't have to dwell on it anymore. I just wanted to bring it up. So, yeah. Cool. Are there any other comments on this? Sounds like there's some action items, and Jacques and Terry, I can follow up with you two individually, or just one of you actually. So just one of you. Cool. I'm gonna move on to the March 31st housing listening session. So I have done some work on this. First, I'll just thank Judy for putting me in touch with some folks at EFA, including Julie Van Domelen, and individuals involved in the Participatory Advisory Council at EFA. There was discussion at our last meeting about having those individuals come to the meeting to, share their experiences. So I'm really excited about that. And I want to structure this conversation in two different parts. The first discussing the structure of this event, and then the second part, outreach. So in terms of the structure, last year when we were discussing the listening session, crazy to say, but last year, I recall that there was a general consensus around the session being kind of an open forum for individuals to not only share their experiences, air grievances, but, and discuss like their situation, what's working, what's not working. So that was kind of I think that was what we all liked. And then afterwards, board members could ask questions as they see fit. Maybe there would be a presentation from the city Housing and Human Services, as well as EFA. I know that individuals at EFA are interested in giving a presentation, and the question becomes, do we want to have those at the beginning or at the end? Those presentations from the city and then from EFA. So I wanted to open it up and see where people were with this, with the planning of this, and what you all thought would be the best way to structure this event. I've given it thought, but I wanted to hear from all of you. Juliet.
It's a virtual, right?
Yep.
So I think one of the most meaningful things I think we can do is help people solve their housing insecurity problems and connect them with resources. And sometimes people may be housing insecure, or they may have some issues going on and they don't know where to turn. So having a forum for people to learn about how they can solve their issues and connecting those people with resources would probably be the most impactful thing we could do for community members. And so I think the city presenting the resources available, and then making sure we connect people if they have particular issues, either together or offline, to be discreet. And if people want to share comments, I think that's fine. But I think really what we want to do is solve problems, solve the housing insecurity problems, or connect people to resources.
Yeah. No, excuse me, weird. Definitely, I think, as well as how, connecting people with, solutions. This is a great opportunity for us to just hear the community, hear from our neighbors, hear from individuals who may not, speak at council meetings or share their experiences, right? So, we're kind of not filtering per se, but just taking this all in as a way of processing it. And then, this might inform something that we do down the road and recommend or advise to council. So I definitely want to be able to hear hear the experiences of people, right? For example, like the emails that we got from individuals in these manufactured housing communities sharing their experiences, that was absolutely invaluable. And, the ordinance made sense to me, but there was a lot of color and context brought into that with those stories that were shared. So, do we want to have that at the beginning, or the presentation, or wait until the end? Would it make sense to you, Juliet, to have that at the beginning, potentially, like have that presentation first?
I think the presentation first makes sense, because if we advertise it as an event where people can learn more about how to help solve their challenges that they may be experiencing around pandemic related or other related housing insecurity, then we can help them quickly at the beginning of the meeting, and then people can stay if they want to share their comments
Okay.
in specific situations afterwards.
Okay, great. Judy, and then Mason.
I agree with Juliet that the presentation should be first. And I like the idea of having have the city talk about resources. And the group from EFA who wanted to speak, although they're inviting staff to attend, the people who will be presenting will be their leadership group. So it's people who have used the services of EFA. So we'd be starting right out in a presentation after the human services resources, starting out with some people with lived experience using those services.
Okay. Thanks, Judy. Mason?
Yeah, in the past, we've cracked the surface using the presentations in the beginning, and then we open it up for listening because we're a listening session. So it's definitely great to hear from people so that they can potentially inform any of our work plan items. That's one of HAB's mandates. So sprinkling a little bit of it all the way through definitely makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense to me. It makes sense to have those presentations at the beginning. Yeah, that sounds good to me. I am really interested in just giving people a place to speak. You know, we're an official city board. There's merit to, you know, us just listening to the experiences that, you know, people come forward with. And so, you know, really giving them space for that is, that's important. So that sounds good to me. Are there any other thoughts about the structure, you know, how things will happen during this session? The technicalities besides the point, I'll sync up with, you know, Corey and Jay on that, you know, how the meeting will be run, but macro structure. Okay. I know that the tiny homes listening session in February was really successful. I attended that. It was awesome. I really wish we could do this in person. There was, that was just really awesome. And, you know, so much came out of that, but this is what we have, and we'll just make do. And maybe this will give people who couldn't attend, you know, maybe mothers can attend this, you know, who have children, you know, people who wouldn't otherwise be able to attend in person can come. So there is opportunity as well. And then outreach, this is just an idea I have, you know, in addition, you know, of course, folks from EFA will be here. I want to, in addition to a letter to the editor and, you know, collaboration with the city's public relations and comms team to get the word out, I'm interested in potentially drafting like an outreach letter that outlines the intent of this session and calls for participation, and send it to a variety of groups, thinking, you know, nonprofits, housing providers, landlord groups, HOAs, whatever, just like a broad variety of groups, you know, to get as much, you know, different perspective as possible. And in the past, I don't know if this was done, but this is something that would just like make my life easier to draft a letter that outlines the intent. And of course, what I'd like to do is draft it, have it ready for next meeting so that you all we can all approve it, the language, etc., and then send it out. And I'd send it out. And what I'll also do is I will have the letter to the editor. Actually, it's not a letter to the editor. It's an opinion piece, I guess. I want to draft that so that you can all look at that at our next meeting, so we can talk about it, and then have it ready to send out. So those are just more planning purposes, me walking through that in my mental head space. But does that all sound good? Like to, you know, have this letter to go out to a variety of groups, as well as the other like generic, you know, outreach planning strategies. Okay.
Can I make a suggestion, Charlotte?
Yes.
So I guess I wouldn't necessarily wait until the next meeting. I mean, the sooner that we draft something,
yeah,
the more beneficial it will be.
Okay. Yeah.
The more lead time that we can give to our communications folks.
Okay.
And And also, I mean, I know you're an excellent writer, but if you want assistance in terms of how to, you know, best communicate this, you know, we can get our communications person to help.
Yeah.
If so, I'm offering that. So if you just want to put a basic structure together, sort of what is the purpose of the listening session, the overall structure, and what we're hoping to, you know, get out of it. I think if you have that structure, I can share it with our communications person, and he can help you define it. So
Great. So what I'll do is I'm just going to create kind of bullet points, you know, time, intent, you know, structure, and I'm going to have Corey send that out to everyone, much like the letter to council, have you all look at it. And then before I meet with the comms team at the city, I'll just, you know, have the go ahead from all of you so that there's transparency there. That sounds great. I would love to meet with that person or people. Yay.
And that works for me too. So thank you.
Yay. Planning. We were going to do this last year, but you know, things take time. Things take time. So that's that. Are there any other comments or questions about the planning of the listening session? No. Okay. Okay, great. I am wondering if it makes sense to actually move the agenda item that I proposed at the beginning. Trying to think about what would make sense in terms of discussion. The reason why I'm pondering this is because it kind of it intersects with the work plan review. So I'm wondering, Jay, if we can just move that agenda item after to the conversation following the conversation about the work plan. If that's okay.
Works for me. Okay.
So let's move to talk about the work plan, which Jay put together. And apologies if you're all hearing voices. I live in a 600 square foot apartment. My partner is on a call in the other room and our walls are thin. So apologies there if you hear voices, but oh good, you're sharing your screen. Perfect. Do
you want me to talk about this?
Yeah.
So this is a tool that we have been using for a while, I guess, just outlining the next couple of meetings and sort of what's in the pipeline. And it kind of fell off sort of our usual task, and that's my bad. Just with the pandemic and everything and priority shifting, but I think it's great that we're bringing it back. So everything is here, and it's really kind of up to the chairs, and I think there was a desire from the full board to actually have a voice in sort of what charting out our agendas in the future. So anyway, these are all the topics that I could think of and the chairs could think of. If you have anything to add, or if you want to start populating the February and March meetings, we could do that too.
Jay, did you pull the council work plan items from their council agenda committee meeting or a plan, or where did you pull that from? Like, where are you pulling all the content for the council work plan items from?
Memory.
Nice.
Well, and it's also going to change. I mean, so sorry, the other caveat is we don't really know what council's priorities are going to be until after the retreat, right? And it changes every year. There's a whole new list of priorities. There are ongoing projects, and I think the ongoing projects and initiatives, that's sort of the list at the bottom. We know that stuff will happen. We just don't know when. So that'll get plugged in later. But the upcoming items are sort of things I think that we tried to identify that are unrelated to what council's priorities are, right? So there was an interest in long ago, sort of this legislative agenda. Oh, we did do that last year, didn't we? And we could do that again this year. There's also the discussion about member CHAFA and the entitlement process and trying to understand that a little bit better. Alpine Balsam is coming up for rezoning. So I know that's going to happen regardless of council's priorities. So I think that would be of interest to this board. East Boulder Subcommunity Plan, it's been slow, but it's still going along. And then there was discussion last time about the middle income housing strategy review, and then we just brought up the use table. So that's kind of how it's organized, but things can move around. That's probably more than what you're asking me.
No, that's helpful. That's helpful. That's helpful. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm thinking, but if there are comments or questions, Judy, I saw your hand go up.
Oh, yeah, Jay, thanks for doing that. That's really helpful and happy to see it. I think you can take the HRC HAB Joint Committee on the Unhoused off because we're done with our work and not meeting anymore. And also, my only request is that whenever council does develop its housing work plan, that we see it as soon as possible and see any changes, because I would love it if HAB could give input a little earlier in the process that's been happening. And of course, this year's been crazy because of COVID and all that, but I think that would be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
How does that look?
Great.
And their retreat is when?
23rd and 24th, I think.
Okay.
22nd and 23rd. Yep.
Okay.
So we'll talk about it at the next meeting.
Okay. Okay.
I mean, maybe to dovetail with that for February, it would make sense to then look at just where we stand on these projects and initiatives, just kind of a little update where they all are in the process. And then obviously that'll be impacted potentially by council's retreat. But just so we get on board with those. I'd like to, I mean, I'm definitely interested in us engaging with Alpine Balsam as it comes back around. And yeah, the sub-community plan and community benefit also.
Yeah, and just so you know, I'm the co-project manager for the rezoning of the Alpine Balsam.
Oh, great.
Benefit team. So, I mean, I know most of these projects.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm peripherally involved with the East Boulder Sub-Community Plan, but I'll find out sort of where we are for next month.
Kind of in response to that, as council continues to look at these projects and initiatives, are they hoping to get input from our board when they ask for it? Or like we can talk about it and that's fine. But traditionally they ask us, for our input on, X, Y, and Z, then they look at what we say, right? So is that typically how the workflow happens, right? Like there are certain things that we haven't been asked to look at, but we, that do relate to housing. So I just want to know, do you anticipate us like being, asked to look at this stuff or?
No, I think the question is, I don't think you should be asking council permission to review something that has a direct relationship to housing. I think you should just say, we'd like to hear about it. We'd like to provide input to council. Council can still disregard it.
Right. That's
There's
fair.
an interest from this board to discuss an item. I will do my best to get get it in front of you.
Okay.
But I think we have to be clear that there should be a direct housing connection, is sort of the sense I get.
Yes.
And in that vein, I mean, I would think about community benefit. The first phase was all about housing. Phase 2 has nothing to do with housing. So, just something.
Right.
So, I mean, I put it on there just because I want you to know what's happening with it, but it's probably not something that would come to you for a recommendation.
Okay. That's helpful. The next agenda item, just so everyone knows, kind of relates to that question. So we don't have to stop this conversation now, but are there any specific things that items that people want to bring forth or questions related to this work plan? So I'm scrolling. Oh, sorry, Danny. Sorry. It's like in the weird bar, and so I have to scroll.
I can't see my own hand. I just wanted to bring up too, like that East Boulder sub-community plan. We had talked about that last year, and it was really pretty interesting because, I mean, it's really the only area of the whole city that essentially nobody lives in. And I think it dovetails into a lot of the issues that we had when we started talking about the unhoused in terms of those parking lots and the available space there. And that's office space now. It's not being utilized, et cetera. So I just want to flag that because I think that can play a role in a lot of different things. And I think it really kind of congeals with a lot of the things that we're, wrestling with over the past 12 months. And so I'd love to have us stay connected to that.
Mm-hmm. Jay, when do you know when they'll be when council will be discussing the East Boulder subcommunity plan next, or where they are with that process?
I do not, but I will find out. So I put in February or March, so we'll see. Unless Sarah knows.
Sorry, Sarah.
No, I don't know when it's coming up, but Danny, I just want you to be aware that planning board is very focused on those issues and trying very hard to make sure that the balance of protecting industrial zones is balanced with housing opportunities and housing affordability insofar as we can, given where the process is at this point. So I don't want you to think that we aren't already very focused on trying to move forward on the issues that HAB concerns itself with when it comes to the East Boulder subcommunity plan.
Awesome. Okay.
Great. That's really great. Are you regularly discussing that item at your meetings, or just kind of as new things come up?
No, the city, so as with all boards and commissions, we are presented with material by city staff and are asked to respond at that time to whatever the stage is that initiative is at. So the subcommunity plan has come before us twice since I've been on the board, maybe 3 times. I can remember 2. Maybe there was a third that I'm just not remembering. And the first time it came before us, actually the first time it came before us was, here is what we're doing. The second time was, here's an update and here's what we have begun to sort of juggle. And the third time was very recently, actually, and it was actually sharing with us a new tool, a 3-dimensional tool that the city will be using to try to picture what the 3 different ideas that the working group has put together, what those 3 ideas might look like, and asking for our input. And a major part of our input, from my recollection, was, so the 3-dimensional tool is great because it gives us all a visual, but it's only as good as the inputs that are put in. And what we really wanted to focus on was what could you tell us? What could this tool tell us in terms of the tools that might produce housing that's more affordable, meaning smaller lots, more dense development, fewer parking, less parking. Like, again, it's a tool that's like, you put meat in, you get sausage out. So it's what's the meat that's going in. And so we had a long conversation with lots of inputs from everybody on the planning board about what we would like those inputs to look like. So my guess is that the next meeting that we'll have, the next time we're talking about this, will be when the staff comes back to us with what the sausage would look like based on the inputs for those three different ideas that were presented by the working group. And then, you know, like with everything else in planning and particularly in Boulder, then there's got to be a long public process that has to do with, well, what would the zoning changes look like, and what would happen to the businesses are there, and what about height restrictions, and what about this, and what about that, and have we actually included the folk, I mean, especially if you're concerned about equity, the people who live near East Boulder Rec Center, to East Boulder subcommunity area. There's a wealthy community off to the south, and there's a manufactured home community that's in the county off to the north. And there's concerns that that manufactured home community has not really been fully engaged. It's not that it's been ignored, but it just hasn't been fully engaged. So there's a lot of work still to be done. Jay, would you agree with that?
Oh, yeah, I mean, they're not even close to making decisions on anything. So a quick update would be helpful. And then just so you have a better sense of what the work is and what the time frame is.
Great.
I'm
Thanks.
sure they'd be more than happy to do that.
Thanks. Yeah. And Sarah, thanks for that update. It's a very exciting project, and it'll take a long time. Cool. At this point, anything else with relation to this work plan that Jay has up on the screen? Okay.
That's for February?
And if you don't have anything right now, you can always email me.
Had follow up from their tweet on there. So
yeah, good. I think, yeah, great. Okay, cool. Then the next, the item that I wanted to add was just a recap of last night, the presentation at the council meeting, which I think was fine. I did get a fair amount of engagement, and there is a request from, let's see, from Rachel and Aaron to propose to council how HAB can, better strengthen our relationship with council with relation to the issues and topics pertaining to housing. We all recognize that there were a few times this past year where we could have been better utilized, with topics relating to housing, homelessness, etc. So we don't have to have an answer now. And I think that, the fact that Jay said, a little while ago, if there's a topic related to housing that council will be discussing, we should just discuss it. I think there are some people who are like, well, we should only discuss something if council brings it to our board. And then there are others who want to just discuss it if it's related to housing. And so I want to, hear where people are at with that. And ultimately, my goal is just for us to better collaborate with council to, create these, creative and robust, solutions, with our recommendation, lots of diverse experiences on this board that council has to draw from. So that was a long way of just getting to where I want to get to, which is, better engaging with council, and what does that look like? one more thing I'll add is that I know Adam was present at many of the unhoused joint committee meetings. And it sounds like, from my recollection, that was successful in having him there. And, as a former member of HAB, that was a fitting space for him to be in. So I don't know if, I don't know what that looks like going forward. If Adam's if we want Adam to continue engaging with, what we're doing here, and if that makes sense for him to be some sort of liaison. Again, these I'm just kind of spitballing. I just want to open it up and see where y'all are at with that topic. So, our relationship to council and just thinking about that. So, yeah.
Sure. Are you looking at that now? I fall on the side of saying if it's something that relates to housing, we should be discussing it, and within our own internal mechanisms, deciding how we're going to move forward with it or what we want to do with it. And then once we've made those decisions, we just, as far as the interaction with council is, I think to put together clear recommendations or areas of interest for our work plan, that we want to move forward with. So that's where I am on it. And I think that's where we should be.
Yeah. And the energy that I got from council was that they are really that from those who asked me questions, etc., like there is a desire to engage more this year with us and understand, where we're coming from. And even if, there isn't a direct ask, can you look at this particular thing within this, this ordinance or whatever, I think it makes sense for us as a board to discuss it if it relates to housing and, just provide council with what we think, recommendation wise. So Judy.
I agree with you. I thought they seemed pretty interested. I mean, they had several people asking questions. I think Mark Wallach asked a question too. And they seem to be asking, what is it you want? And that they asked you to get back to them. So I think at some point we need to do that. And you had suggested a couple things. One was, yes, you'd be happy to get back to them and that we were having a meeting tonight and you would talk to all of us. And then the other one was you did suggest the idea of a liaison. Now, I don't know, Adam didn't volunteer to be the person or anything, so I don't know if he would want to be or should be. But the idea of a liaison is good because that would help a lot where there would be just one person that traditionally it'd be you who would go to that person. We would talk about it and you would go to that person. I think, that would be an idea that I think might be helpful.
Yeah.
But we should probably try and come up with a couple things so you have something. Yeah. So you just don't go, I don't know.
Yeah, for sure. And I would like to get to council and an email, following up on that. And so if there are any other thoughts on that, I'd love to hear. Danny, you're in the dark. Sorry.
So I think, the fact that we're having this meeting tonight kind of reflects, I think, a collective eagerness to, have a lot of that interaction with council. We moved it to the 13th because we thought that those regs were going to be reviewed on the 19th and the 20th would have been too late. And so I think that, that's a good jumping point for the whole notion that, we want to know everything that's going on with housing, but we want to be there for them and just really kind of make that point to them that, look, we're here when these things come up, we really want to play a role in it. And a lot of times it's going to be very much a supporting role, right? But, we want to be included in that. And every time we have a chance to take a look at these things and really kind of delve into it and stuff, it seems to work really well. all the way down the line. And so I think that's one of the messages to really, relay to them too, is that, we like to be able to provide that assistant role. And so.
Mm-hmm. Making a note. Thanks. Anything else there? Yeah, I think that I'd like to just follow up with them and just send an email within the next week or so, just reiterating the excitement, desire, eagerness to work together in the next year, among those other points. And I will throw out the suggestion about some sort of liaison, but it was really just an idea. I didn't want to put Adam on the spot, but I know I did. So yeah, that was all. Was anyone able to watch? Judy, I know you watched. Was anyone able to attend last night? Yay. Okay, well, Sarah was there, so that's good. Okay, cool. We can move on then to new business. Is there any new business? No. This is more of just a question I forgot to ask earlier, but is planning board looking at any housing related projects right now, or is have you identified any in your upcoming work plan for?
The answer to that is almost everything that comes before us is housing. So as Jay laid out in the list, that list is what's going to be coming before us in terms of policy frameworks, in terms of specific projects. I don't know. We're not kept apprised of what's in the pipeline until it is on our agenda in terms of particular projects. What we said in our letter to City Council was we really want them to focus. Our priorities would be, if they were to approve them, our priorities would be the use table review, specifically the neighborhood centers. We very much want to be able to move forward on that. I would like the city to move forward on that. Additional sub-community plans, particularly in Gun Barrel and at Diagonal Plaza. Discussing new tools or potential tools that might lead to more opportunities for housing that is affordable, rather than this sort of very high-end housing that produces funds to pay for permanently affordable housing. Trying to figure out what are some of the, to discuss what are some of the tools that might be available that don't exist right now in the city that could reduce that high-low dynamic that we have. And Jay, do you remember anything else? I'm sorry, that's what comes to mind first and foremost. Yeah, so
that was
pretty comprehensive.
Yeah.
It's been a while since I read your letter, sorry.
That was something that I'm just intrigued by the last point about finding other is it funding mechanisms you're just, or
we don't know. I think it could be, it could be anything from, the recognition that we don't seem to have a full complement of tools that get us to the place where we can get ahead of. So here's the key, and I think Jacques will agree with me on this. Development in Boulder is driven by the developers. The developers come to us with a project, and then the city responds. The staff responds, the various boards and commissions respond, et cetera, et cetera. So everything's driven by that. Even though we have the Boulder Valley Comp Plan and we have the land use code and we have our zoning and all that stuff. At the end of the day, it's driven by the developers. So the question is, what are tools that exist that may not already be in our toolbox that can either get us ahead of developers in for certain opportunities, maybe city-owned land, or that can be incentives to think creatively about incentives to get a different kind of outcome than just high-end luxury, and then Boulder Housing Partners and permanently affordable. And we don't have a list of things. We have to think about it. We need input from actual experts in the field to give us some ideas.
Cool. Interesting. Jack?
I just wanted to say that, yeah, that's something that, as Sarah said, she knows I have an interest in, and I would love to talk some more with you, Sarah, about what you guys are thinking on that, and just take a real close look at the relationship between, as you say, the developers, our existing code, and our comp plan, and how it suggests we're moving. Because I don't think those things are effectively aligned to get to that end goal that the comp plan is talking about. So it's great that you guys are engaging with that. And I think that'd be a great place for us to put some of our energy to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Jay?
Yeah, I think what Sarah's describing aligns really well with our sort of review of the middle income housing strategy, to see if sort of we're getting the outcomes that we had hoped for with that. And I think, the missing middle is sort of the way it's been described is, our code really incentivizes the high end stuff. And then we, as, a government agency, are able to provide the permanently affordable, but it's the stuff in between that we're not getting that we used to get in our cities, 50, 60 years ago. So how do we get that back? And it's a pretty thorny issue, and requires sort of a whole rethink of how we approach zoning and our regulatory code. So,
and I would just say,
it's worth talking about.
Yeah, my own perspective is, and I hate to keep coming back to the neighborhood centers issue, but I actually think the reimagining of our old shopping areas as a neighborhood center with mixed use and housing, that's not just what we have at Transit Village, but much more like what we have at Holiday, is a really potentially amazing way to open up the opportunity for housing that serves the widest variety, the widest range of needs in the city, and can help us add the units that we say we want to add to meet our missing middle, who have told us what they want. And they don't want high-end rentals. They want what they can buy already out in the hinterlands, which is either a home or a townhome or a duplex with a little bit of a yard. And that's not what's being produced right now. And we've got to figure out how we can move it in that direction.
Yeah. Terry?
I think I totally agree with all that. The short answer is incentivize us to build more smaller products as opposed to big, larger products. And it's all about zoning. It's all about zoning. I totally understand from planning board perspective. I have a bunch of friends on planning board over the years, and so I hear this all the time. It's, well, we don't have any control. It's always just projects that are brought to us. Well, the projects that are brought to planning board are based on what people can do, right? I mean, they're driven by zoning. It's all zoning. I mean, since we're kind of just talking theoretically, let's go crazy. Let's rezone a neighborhood that largely is being torn down and rebuilt into really expensive high-end homes, multi-million-dollar homes. Rezone that whole neighborhood and don't allow those big homes, but allow duplexes or triplexes on those 8,000 square foot lots. So instead of buying an $800,000 teardown and building a $2.5 million single family, you have the $800,000 tear down, and you build 3 $800,000 townhomes, or a duplex that's, as crazy as it sounds, $1 million a side or $800,000 a side, and it's still a lot less expensive than the big fancy home. So I know that's never going to happen, but if we want projects to come to planning board that are in the middle, then incentivize that, allow that to happen, and incentivize it to happen. That's the short answer.
Right.
How
Now,
to do
those
it are very controversial.
Yeah, those incentives matter. And I actually, there's a little bit of a zone, there's a zone that is like, it's up at 55th off of Arapahoe, and it must have been a small farm that got rezoned, and the parcels are 3,000 square feet and the homes are 1,500 square feet.
Yep.
And it's a lovely little neighborhood. And
Yep.
I'm not saying that's all we should be building, but it is possible to build single family homes as well as duplexes, triplexes, and apartment buildings, but you have to make the parcels a little bit smaller. And anyway, so right, so it's just like thinking about, it's like thinking about how to do this, and it can't be done piecemeal. It has to really be done. And so I think this conversation about what are some of the tools we have, how do we get ahead of this? The use table review, some of that is zoning changes. So it's a lot to take on, and I really appreciate how much staff is gonna have to do to make this make sense to the public, because there's nothing quite as dull as our use table, but it is what drives what gets built.
Absolutely. It's all about zoning. To take Martin Acres and allow those 6,000 square foot lots to be subdivided down into 2 lots, just like you said, 3,000 square feet each, 1,500 square foot single family homes with a little backyard, and you drive the price down because it's 1,500 square feet and not a 3,500 square foot new build. There's a million ways to do it. We just haven't done it. You know?
Cool.
Sorry, I didn't mean to digress.
No, there's a lot. I feel like I want to have a conversation with people from the zoning board about this. I don't know what their priorities are. So
BOZA actually, the zoning actually goes through planning. BOZA is very specific. I mean, BOZA is important too, but the zoning conversations go through planning board. So you're talking to us.
Oh, great. It's not clear cut who looks at what projects per se, right? Cool. Well, I'm just looking at the clock here. It's 8:57. So I just want to be respectful of everyone's time. And I know that there are some matters from staff. So I'd like to move on to that. If everyone, I think that we will go over 9. So I'm going to put forward a motion to extend the meeting to, Jay, how long do you think you're going to need for?
I can do it in 2 minutes.
Really? Okay.
It'll be really quick, I promise.
Okay.
So I just wanted to give a quick request that if you know anybody that would love to be a part of HAB, to make sure that they do apply. We'll miss Judy, but it would be great to give council a nice big slate of candidates to choose from. So if you do know anyone, please encourage them to apply. The deadline is January 28th. And then a reminder for the council retreat. So January 22nd, it's a Friday. They start at 4 p.m. And then they go to Saturday morning at 8 a.m. So just to give you a sense, and the details are on the city council website. Mason, question about something there?
Yeah, just to tack on to that, Better Boulder does their boards and commission training for anybody interested as well. And I know they're going to host that again this year. So if there are people that are interested and want help filling out their applications.
And then the other item was the HSBC membership changes. And I guess that was Judy's request. And I'm not sure, Judy, based on, you talked about it earlier. I wasn't sure if you still want sort of an update on that or not. So I'll leave it up to you, Judy. You're good? Okay. You're on mute.
I shouldn't even say this. I shouldn't say this is better. I was on mute. I don't remember why I asked for it. So, so I guess I'm okay.
Okay. Yeah, that's it. That's it from staff, unless you have any questions for me.
No, thank you, Jay.
That 9 o'clock.
All right, with that, is there anything else before we close this meeting? All right, then motion to, well, calendar, yeah, it's 9 p.m. Calendar check. Can that be our calendar check for today? I think we looked at the work plan, so I think we're good. So in that case, motion to adjourn this meeting. I see a few seconds. All right, all in favor? All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for all the teamwork today too, guys. Really appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Have a good night, everyone. Bye-bye.
Good night, everybody.